If you're a beekeeper and you have a backyard apiary, you end up with a lot of honey. Your bees are going to go out to flowers everywhere and they're going to bring back nectar. One of the things that you can do when you keep bees is make your own honey wine. It's called mead. And this is the honey finished by the bees, representing millions of flowers that your bees have worked. So, no small thing. Let's make one of the oldest alcoholic beverages ever made by man, and that is mead. Here we have jars of honey. We are going to take 5 quarts of honey, and we're going to make 5 gallons of finished mead. And in this video, I'm going to walk you through that step by precious step. Don't use your leftover honey that you don't care about. Pick the very best honey that you can get from your apiary. This honey came out of a flow hive. So it hasn't been filtered. It has not been altered. It's raw honey. It's got everything in it. And this is my no heat mead recipe that I got from a very well-known book that I'm going to show you in a minute. These are all the things that you need to make mead. You need a cleanser. You're going to need some yeast, and it's a very specific kind of yeast. We're going to show you that as well. And you're going to have yeast nutrient. Some people will say that nutrient and yeast energizer are interchangeable, but in the recipe that I'm following, they're both required, so you're going to need it all. You also need buckets that are food grade. This bucket has a 6-gallon capacity and becomes my fermenter. And look, there's an airlock at the top that you'll fill with water later. There are a couple of different styles of airlocks. I'm going to show you that. These big glass jugs are called carboys. It's all new to me. It's a lot of fun to learn these things, and that's another style of airlock. And then, of course, we have a test tube there for the hydrometer. And, of course, again, the honey. I'm going to walk you through every step. And these components you can get in a kit. So I'll put that kit down in the video description below, and you can look up these parts on your own. Now, I started this process back in January, so we are already several months into it. I also filter the water with this pure filter, PUR, and I'll put a link to that too. They say not to use reverse osmosis water and not to use distilled water because you want your water to have minerals and other things in it. So that was also new to me. Very interesting. The Complete Mead Maker by Ken Schramm. So everything we're about to do here comes right out of this book. And I'm going to put this down again in the video description, and it's one of the most popular mead making guides that you can find. Now, the mead that we're making today in this video is the most basic. So this is called the no heat method. So, and of course, the order of production is right in here. Sanitize your equipment, mix the honey and water, rehydrate the yeast, and so on. And we use food grade buckets. I ended up buying a bunch of these, by the way, because you can never have too many food grade buckets. And I'm going to use these to mix everything up, and I'm going to show you how. Also, you start everything with Easy Clean No Rinse Cleanser. So it's 1 tablespoon per gallon. So here's my tablespoon. And here's the cleanser. And we're going to put it in my food grade bucket. And so I'm going to make my own sanitizing fluid here. Now the cool thing about this is you don't have to dry it off and rinse everything later. You just air dry it, let it go. These are the gallons of water that came through the filter system. And of course you needed to see it in slow motion as well. Whenever I think you might be getting bored, I'm going to sneak in a slow motion sequence here just because it's cool to me. So now we're mixing it back and forth to make sure that the sanitizer is completely dissolved, bucket to bucket, just like this. Now everything that's going to come in contact with your solution for making your must, for making your mead, needs to be sanitized. We don't want any wild bacteria on our stuff. This is a brand new sponge. I'm also using the sanitizer to do that. This is the interior. And so we want to make sure, according to the book, you can't be too clean, too sanitary when making mead. So, and again, this is my test tube for the hydrometer. There's the hydrometer itself because that's going to be in contact with my mead. There are 2 different types. I prefer the one that's on the right, and it comes with the kit. Here's also a different type of stirrer that you can use. I picked this up. I was going to use it because it fits through the neck of the carboys, which are the big glass jugs, and then you can use that with an electric drill. Decided not to. So now we're filling the jugs with pure water after we've sanitized. So this will actually become the mead. So we put 3 gallons of that in. Remember, we're going to have a finished 5 gallons. So we left enough room here. Now we're going to pour this honey in here. You know, a quart of honey sells for $20 a quart. So with 5 quarts, we're investing $100 worth of honey that we otherwise could have sold it direct for. But we're turning 5 quarts into 5 gallons. So I think maybe that's worth it. And we just pour one after the other. And again, this honey is not all the same. You'll notice some is darker. Some of this is clover honey. Some of it is actually late season goldenrod honey, which can be grainy to some degree. So this will not be super clear. I think we're going to have problems getting some of this out of suspension. Of course, here's the honey pouring in slow motion because it's important to see because it just looks cool. And then we're going to mix all the honey up. Now, when you are mixing this stuff, honey and water, it's sticky. It gets on everything. Now, one of my containers was actually half a gallon, so I have to pour a quart of it out. But what I want you to look at here is on this Pyrex measuring cup. See those little white spots on there? When you use that sanitizer and it dries out, it does leave this white chalky residue behind. So it's kind of a visual reminder that, yeah, we already sanitized that stuff. So there's another quart. We're going to pour that in there too. And that will finish off our contribution of 5 quarts of honey from your own backyard apiary. Now, when I started this process, of course, we were not confined at home, but we are today, thanks to the coronavirus, COVID-19. We're not allowed to leave the yard. And one of the things that's increased is liquor consumption. 50% liquor consumption in the United States because people are stuck at home. So I guess they want to drink. But if you're a beekeeper, you can make your own alcoholic beverages. So we're going to put in this yeast nutrient, 2 teaspoons for 5 gallons. Also, we're going to put in the yeast energizer, 1 teaspoon for 5 gallons. And again, some people say that these are interchangeable, but I'm following the established recipe that's in this book. Of course, you needed to see this going in slow motion. And now we're going to mix it up. How are we mixing it? Bucket to bucket. So this is called mixing the must. So we're going to pour it back and forth. I'm not going to walk you through every part of it, but you get the idea. And of course, you needed to see it in slow motion because I think that's cool. And it takes a while for honey to mix with water, especially when it's almost at room temperature, which this is. Remember, we're doing the cold water mead method. Now, before we put our yeast in, we have to hydrate the yeast. We have to get that in there, and there's very specific temperature parameters. Now, the recipe parameters differ from this 71B, which is Lalvin yeast that is specific for mead. Yeasts are different, but here on the back it says to keep it at 95 to 98 degrees while we're hydrating the yeast. So, I don't know, whichever is more stringent, that's probably the one you should follow. This is what the yeast looks like. And of course, the water and honey that we mix together now has a nice frothy top on it. And we're at 98.2. As soon as it drops to 98, I'm going to go ahead and add the yeast. Now we're supposed to leave it there. And they're very specific about this. Let that soak for 15 minutes, and then you can stir it up. Boom, 15 minutes. Let's start stirring. So now after you stir it up for a while, we have hydrated yeast, and that kicks it off. And we're going to pour it right in, which is called pitching the yeast. There are cool terms associated with making mead. So you're going to be learning all of this stuff if this is your first time doing it. And it's a lot of fun. We're doing this entire process right in the kitchen, right on the floor. So now we're going to mix it back and forth. We have to, now that we've added the yeast, we have to mix this and aerate it for a full 5 minutes. So I'm just pouring bucket to bucket back and forth. You can't overdo it. The more you agitate it, the better it is, because the more air you're infusing into the water, and that's going to activate the yeast, which, by the way, is living and it has to multiply. So we did that for over 5 minutes. We're good to go. And the yeast will expand. It's going to consume the sugar. And notice now we have to top it off. So we're going to put a little fresh water in there. Remember, we left space. We did not fill it all the way when we're doing the mixing. Now we top it off at 5 gallons, so we have to mix it up just a little more. I don't want any stratification there. and I want this to work out perfectly. So there we have it. We have pitched our yeast, and this is now called must, and we're going to test it. So the sudsy stuff on the side there, again, is from the sanitizer. Don't worry about that. And it's also from the foam that created at the top. Now we're going to look. This is very easy because this particular hydrometer has a blue section for dessert wine, which is kind of what Honey Mead falls in the category of. And it says their specific gravity must be 1.112 to 1.128. And there we are. It's right in the zone. So it's good to go. We're going to pour that back in the bucket because we don't want to waste it. And now guess what we're going to do? Get right into fermentation. So we're going to put the fermenting bucket lid on, and we also need to put a airlock on top. And this is the airlock. Remember, there's two different designs. There really is no difference in the function. You could probably wet that first to make sure it slips in good, has a nice connection on that rubber grommet. And the bucket is somewhat opaque. Also, there's a fill line already marked into the plastic here, and I'm just putting pure water in it. And you see you've got these little holes on top. And after we put this all in place, we could expect to see bubbles going through this within 24 hours. And that was a lot of fun to see. So here we are 24 hours later, and it's bubbling. Every few seconds, little bubbles come through it. And guess what? If you stick your nose over the top of this thing and smell it, it already starts to smell like alcohol. So what's happening to the sugars that are in there from the honey? Well, they're being broken down by the yeast. And what's the off gas here? Carbon dioxide. So it's converting the sugars into carbon dioxide and alcohol. That's the whole point of this fermentation process. But the only source of this fermentation is the yeast that we put in there, and that's what we want. You don't want wild yeast affecting your mead. The other thing is temperature is fairly critical. We're going to have this at room temperature. I had bags around it. Now we've jumped ahead. This has already been fermenting now for a couple of weeks, and it slowed down, and we're going to rack the mead. So this is a racking cane. There are several different designs. This is the one that I chose to do myself because it's self-priming, and the other one, which is just gravity fed, that you would have to, start by sucking the air through and then not letting that get in your mouth before you put that in the jar and transfer it. So racking it is just a fancy name for taking your must and putting it into another vessel. So in this case, it's going to be glass carboy, a 3-gallon glass carboy, and another 1-gallon jug. And also, before we do any of that, also keep a record of everything you're doing, when you did it, what happened, so that you'll know what worked and what didn't. Hopefully this is going to work perfectly. So we're going to rack it. We're going to move it from one vessel to the next. Take it out of the fermenter, put it into a carboy. And before we do that, we have to sanitize everything. Let's not forget, you can't be too clean. So use the vessel itself for your sanitizer. And then I put these right in the bathtub. And we fill it up. We already put the sanitizer powder in that. And then we just shake that all around to get the entire interior of the carboy good to go. And then we're going to, of course, any tubes that are going to touch our mead, we're going to make sure that those are sanitized too, let them all dry out, and now we can transfer it. So if you have any questions, go ahead and put those down in the video comment section below. The black in there keeps your intake tube off the bottom so that if there is any yeast that's died and fallen to the bottom, which there is, it will not be sucked up and transferred into your next vessel, which in this case is the glass carboy. Also, we're going to test it to see what the alcohol content is. And see if it falls into. See, a higher alcohol content means that now it is less buoyant. So it dropped right down there. We're in beer category. So now is that a good reading? And notice the foam has also died down quite a bit too. You want to make sure this thing isn't sticking to the side of your glass test tube here. So it flows freely, and with the foam out of the way, we get a nice clean reading on that. And now it's good to go. So now we're going to go ahead and rack it into another jar. I'm showing you everything step by step. You can speed this up if this is taking too long, or you can jump ahead. Now we're going to put it in. Of course, it's distributed into the bottom of the jar because we don't want to add a bunch of air into it anymore. We don't want to aerate this. It's kind of a two-man job. And it takes a while because of the tube that I'm using. I probably could have gotten away with not having the little spring-loaded valve at the bottom for this. We could have just siphoned it straight off and let it fill up nice and fast. But it's the way it was set together, so that's what I did. And notice too the color. I wanted it to be really clear. It is somewhat cloudy, so there are particles in suspension, and they do not go out of suspension. The other thing is we want to make sure and shield your must from daylight. So this is sitting on a table by a window. We wrapped it up with industrial trash bags. And now we're taking everything off. Of course, it has to go back through getting cleansed. And we put the airlock back on. Look at that. This is the yeast. Now what happens is while the yeast is in there, and when it consumes the sugars, the alcohol content rises until it eventually, the yeast can't handle that alcohol content. It dies and sinks to the bottom. So the yeast reproduced in your fermenting must here. I don't know if it's called must still or if it's actually called mead yet. So now we're using a different type of airlock, and we put water in that again, and it has the minimum and maximum levels marked on it. All this does is make sure that air from the atmosphere around it does not get into your mead, and only the CO2 pushes it out. So it creates its own protective environment there. So nothing but CO2 is in contact with that. And I just wrapped it for demonstration purposes. You can see that we want to make sure that daylight's not getting in and affecting your mead. There it is, burping away there. And again, when you go by and you sniff that, it smells really good. Now I went ahead and bought a bigger tub of Easy Clean because I've decided I'm going to be doing a lot of this. So I'm also sharing with you what that looks like. Now we have to clean our bottles because guess what? We started this back in January. Now we're in April. We're in the second week of April. So what's happened is the fermentation process has stopped. There's nothing burping through the airlocks anymore. So now we're sanitizing all of these bottles, and we're actually going to bottle our mead. Now, do you think it tastes awesome right now? No, it does not. It tastes okay. I thought it was important to put a slow motion sequence in here. And I put them on the rack for the dishwasher just so these bottles can dry out upside down. I didn't run them through the dishwasher. Now we have all these one-time use caps. We have to sanitize those. And we also have the caps here with the little metal holders on them. So we have two different types of bottles we're going to show you here. And of course we have to clean them up ahead of time. So the sanitizer's in the stainless steel sink. Can't be too clean. There are a lot of people that will tell you that you don't have to pay attention to cleanliness, that it really doesn't matter because honey's antibacterial, and of course it's alcohol, and alcohol will kill stuff. Well, again, I'm just following the recipe in the book. So we cleaned this all up, and now we're about to start filling these bottles, which I have to say is the funnest part of this whole process. Now everything is dried out. Notice that even though we set them on a cloth, I made sure the areas that contact the mead are face up so they're not touching the cloth. I don't want anybody to blame the flavor on something that's been in touch with it. So now look, we're months down the road here, and we're going to pull the airlock off, and we're going to go ahead and fill the jars. Looks pretty good. I think it would be cool though if it were crystal clear, but this will work. Now when you put it in there, remember it's going to displace some of the moisture and get a little overflow there, but that's fine. Remember the black fitting on the intake side there is designed to keep it off the bottom, although we don't see much, if any, yeast on the bottom anymore, which is exactly how it should be. Now we're going to fill the bottles just with a little valve in the bottom of this racking cane, and as it gets to the top, you just lift it up and the valve stops the flow. So then you get a perfect, part way up the neck. I was told by a friend who supervises a bottling plant that you want the height of your mead in each bottle to be consistent and even. So I'm trying to do that by doing the same thing over and over. Obviously, we're just doing this whole thing in the kitchen. And again, you see the dry water spots on the outside of that jar, and that is from the sanitizer. You can later wipe that off with a cloth, and we'll just bottle all of the mead. We did not, of course, end up with a full 5 gallons because I left some in the fermenter each time we racked it. That way, I wanted to make sure not get any of that foggy residue on the bottom into my bottles of finished mead. There's a clip on top that helps it hold its place. And of course, we're still filling some jars. We only had 2 different types of jars here. So the clear ones, I was asked, what's the difference between your clear bottles and your amber colored bottles? And that is the difference. Amber colored is dark. The clear ones are clear. If you want to keep your mead safe, you want to put this in a dark area. You don't want to sit these bottles around because a clear bottle does not protect it from sunlight. So we're going to go ahead and we're going to put the lids on. There you go. We did taste it. It tastes pretty interesting right now. It does not taste sweet like honey would or like a dessert wine the way you would think. It really tastes like a dry wine. So this is the cap in place. That's the configuration. The next one, of course, are the twist-on single-use caps that actually came with these bottles. So I'm going to put that down in the video description as well so you can look at those. And there you have it. So they come 12 to a box, and I designed my own labels. The way to be real, raw honey wine mead. And there it is. So I designed my own labels. We now have our own mead. Can we sell this stuff? No, you can't sell it. You made it at home. So my state prohibits the sale of homebrew. So instead, what I'm going to do is use it for the barter system. So here it is. When will it be suitable for drinking for real? Not until July. We want it to have about 6 months in the bottle now before we drink it. So that's it. I hope you enjoyed this video. I hope you're thinking about maybe taking some of the honey that your bees are making, if you're a backyard beekeeper, and turning that into honey mead. Thank you so much for watching, and I wish you well during this period of staying at home with your bees.